Welcome back. So this is going to be our first ever 8-week patch in Honkai Star Rail history. Rabbi has been declared missing, and 3.8 will take a look into our girlfriend Firefly's backstory, alongside with an entire version of unlimited shielding for Super Break, right? The banner is pretty straightforward, with the new unit being just Constance or the Dahlia, with rerunning Firefly Fugue Lingsha for the Super Break Premium team, as well as the Sunday Aglaea being there to buff Currency War. I don't know really what it's gonna be. So we're just gonna jump straight into the pruning opinions for this 3.8, which I think is relatively straightforward. But before we actually get into the banner itself, I kind of want to just dedicate this special segment for the pool income of what to expect in version 3.8, right? So because we do have a 2-week extension, I think one very important thing to remember is that you can actually save your pools. Wow. You actually cannot spend all your stellar jades and pools within that version, because you can actually bring them into the next version. So I think this is really good, because 3.8 is probably one of, if not the best opportunities for free-to-plays, for casuals, light spenders to save pools and prepare for the upcoming version 4 unit, whatever they may be. So above is gonna be a quick little screenshot and calculation from the CN community based on the dailies, as well as a rough calculation for events, plus a separate roll assuming you can full 3-star clear the 3 endgame content, being MOC, Pure Fission, and Epoch Shadows, not inclusive of Anomaly Arbitration, which doesn't have any stellar jades, right? So you can see from the pools over here, free-to-plays can expect almost 130 pools, with 103 for limited and up to 26 for the standard banner, assuming you can clear all of them at 3-star content. For the monthly pass and battle pass, it's gonna be 120 to 140 limited pools, and then monthly pass is gonna be 128 to 148 limited pools respectively. So this also means that for the first time in Honkai Star Rail history ever since version 1.0, we are getting one of, if not the highest amount of pools available within this one entire patch, on top of having a relatively easy decision on the banners with minimal amount of FOMO, which is a very real thing that most casual players will experience, especially for example if you have been playing through 3.7 with the premium remembrance flagship on the shield environment with Cyrene itself, right? So with that in mind, you could go ahead and try being greedy and stupid for version 3.7 banners, like getting a Cyrene eidolon, right, getting her signature Lycone, pulling for E2 final, whatever it's gonna be, or simply chill for version 4, especially if you have no intention of playing Super Break. I just want to say that it's pretty funny that version 3.7 has some of the more difficult pulling decisions for the players, especially for those who skipped higher scene, and now we finally get a relative breather to prepare for what's to come in the future with new archetypes, enemies, and environments, as we've seen for pretty much every single version in HSR. I cannot stress this enough. Spend your additional pools very carefully. Don't just blow it all on an E2 Cyrene and go into version 4 unprepared, right? So for reference, my personal free-to-play account is gonna probably go into version 4 with almost 400 pools completely free to play by the time it rolls around the, I believe it's 30th of February, because I plan to essentially skip the entire 3.8 patch and commit into the next version flagship when it comes. But I'll say that for another video talking about my free to play account Bob update. This is just purely gonna be the CM putting opinion for the unit itself. That is gonna be the Dahlia and Constance, right? So the early access for this unit, it is gonna be coming this Wednesday, so we're gonna be able to take a deep dive into a kit as per usual. But just at a glance, the Dahlia is a little bit similar to Sunday's banner position back in version 2.7. Both of them bring a pretty strong mechanic, the 2 Chinese which is going to be teacher, but to mainly buff our old team, for this case it is going to be Firefly, Boothill, Rabbi, essentially is going to be the Super Break, without a promise of what is to come in version 4. So for Super Break mains, if you do want to play Super Break in version 4, it is definitely essentially almost a must pool, but pretty much just for the Super Break mains. Otherwise it is essentially a skip as well. So the mechanic that Dahlia has is essentially the ability to deal super break damage before weakness break, and this is inclusive of toughness and all mechanics. So to put it into a visual example over here, let's say the red bar is the HP the target will lose from super break, and the gray bar is the HP the target will lose from a normal break, right? So for a super break DPS, you would then need to deal your initial break damage with super break damage on top of that to kill the target as a whole. And since the super break portion is directly tied tied to your weakness break efficiency, you could say that the actual HP is essentially another toughness bar to be broken, i.e. defeated. So if an enemy has 120 toughness bar with 240 toughness bar worth of HP, right, worth of toughness to be eliminated, this means that Firefly would then need to deal a total of 360 toughness bar damage to kill the target, assuming all toughness bar is only going to be done by Firefly herself. So if you are going to be adding Dahlia into this picture, this will no longer be the case because you're essentially dealing super break damage before even factoring in the actual break, which would require 120 toughness bar, assuming there is no weakness lock or inflated toughness bar, which again, Dahlia is just gonna see even more value, right? So in this theoretical case, Dahlia is essentially a straight up 50% final damage increase to any break DPS, as the amount of time, or rather action value, they would have wasted before weakness breaking is no longer a part of the consideration, and Firefly here can essentially eliminate the target by only dealing 240 total toughness damage. Now this effect is further amplified if you have very high vertical investments on your break DPS as a baseline, so like E2 Firefly with the signature Lycon, where you can essentially kill the target in only 240 toughness damage. And if Dahlia removes 120 worth of toughness bar due to her mechanic, it is a 100% final damage increase. That's because you're going to be dealing more damage after the target is weakness broken. Now of course, this is just a theoretical situation to illustrate what Dahlia could bring to the table for any super break DPS, but in reality, you would definitely use your allies to deal toughness bar damage as well, so your Fugue, your additional runway with the Res Pen, your Lingsha, your Gallagher, and leave that final bit of toughness bar for your break DPS to do it themselves. So instead of like a 12 plus 24, it would probably be closer to 6 or 5 plus 24 worth of total value for the break DPS to deal, right? So to put it simply, Dahlia's mechanic, it is a definitive upgrade for any super break DPS, and as of now, maybe even for the future version 4 DPS, if there's gonna be a version 4 super break coming next time, right? But that being said, there is one glaring flaw that is not necessarily tied with Dahlia, but with super break comp as a whole, which would drastically impact the value that Dahlia would provide to your account. So this flaw is essentially for the entire version 3 itself. There has been a grand total of 0 super break DPS, the last one being Rerun back in version 2.6, which has not gonna rerun ever since. So for most super break mains, they are tied to essentially E0 to E2 Firefly with Fugue, Runmei, Gallagher, or Lingsha as the super break team ever since patch 2.3 with no other new units. And as we all know by now, most if not all super break players, they essentially skipped Boot Hill because he was in an awkward position between Bubbin, and all in the Firefly banner because, you know, lore, girlfriend, story, all that kind of stuff. And most will probably skip out on Reba because they would have known that Fugue Sunday is going to be coming out in the next version update, which would then upgrade the Firefly to the next level before going to M4, right? So taking into that as a consideration, in a sense, if you do pull for Dahlia for your account, majority of the players that do want to pull her, you are essentially pulling a unit in version 3.8 to upgrade a unit back in version 2.3, and that is going to be Firefly. So this situation can be seen from two examples, one being Cypher and one being Sunday. So Cypher was essentially the upgrade to Aircraft and Facial during her launch, right? She was introduced into version 3 as the intention to close up the gap between your older version 2 flagship from back then, which is going to be Aircraft and Facial but not super break, and bring them a little bit closer to the caliber of version 3 DPS as we have right now, for example Final and Chaos Streets, right? Other than that, Cypher is going to be seeing some very niche users for 0 cycles or some very niche team comps as a replacement for other slots, but it is nowhere near a must pull by any means necessary, right? For the other hand, for Sunday, he was essentially the definitive upgrade to the entire version 1 crit DPS roster, especially for Jingyuan. But here is where the problem lies, especially for Sunday and this Jingyuan example, right? Is that once the version 3 meta consolidates, how many Jingyuan players actually use Sunday with Jingyuan to compare them alongside with the performance for our version 3 flagship? On the other hand, how many Sundays ended up being tied to Finon towards the end, only for the eventual Saridra into the Cyrene replacement, all the way by now we're going to be playing the game in 3.7, right? So this part is just going to be from the CN content creator, but I just thought it was a very interesting insight. They essentially believe that Dahlia having 0 link to Amphorius, while still having a very high amount of popularity back in the Annihilation Gang trailer, led to the devs themselves making a literal fan service unit to appease the player base, without having many ties, tools, and forests before we go into version 4. To put it bluntly, they think that the Dahlia is a fan service banner for the constants the Firefly mains one last time before version 4 changes everything once again, just like how version 3 did with version 2 themselves. So the value that Dahlia is going to be bringing to the table, it is pretty much just, can you use Dahlia to take Firefly, or for a very small group of people, the Boothill and Rapa mains, to the same level of Castris and Finon flagship, which is, from a fundamental multiplayer perspective, extremely difficult. And despite a dedicated shielding environment we're most likely going to be getting in version 3.8, how likely can Super Break as a whole keep up with the others by the time version 4 rolls around? Do we know if Super Break is going to be a factor going into version 4? Can we definitively know there will be a future version 4 Super Break DPS? And even if that version 4 Super Break comes in, what if Dahlia just get a rerun by then in order to promote that brand new version 4 Super Break DPS? Which means the urgency for most players getting this unit, especially if you really pull for the Amphoreus flagships, Dahlia's value really goes down by quite a considerable amount. Now, speaking of value, there is one group that can see the most amount of value with the Dahlia. They are essentially the old players who have either quit the entire version 3 or saved everything and skipped the entire version 3 to go into version 4 while struggling with the version 2 team comps, especially version 2 Super Break. So for this particular group of people, this is an excellent 1 to 2 cost vertical upgrade investors, bringing their version 2 Super Break into 3.8 with absolutely zero issue with running Dahlia, because we're definitely going to be getting a break show environment, and then probably the early days of version 4 eventually once they pivot and convert into the version 4 flagship. So that is pretty much gonna be my CM pulling opinions for the Dahlia. And for the rerun banners, frankly speaking, it is super straightforward. For Fuke and Lingsha between both, if you want to play Super Break and you still have not pulled Fuke for like, I don't even know how that is possible. You definitely want to consider yourself getting the Fuke. Lingsha, I would say she is not a definitive must pull, because at the end of the day, her role can be more or less fulfilled by Gedgar, albeit it's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable. Or if you want to try something like a Super Break DPS Lingsha with a Run Mei Fuke as well as Dahlia, you can consider that as an option as well. So these two banners for the second half, or rather the middle half of version 3.8, it is essentially a supplement to try and sell the Super Break archetype to the player base to see if you guys are going to be interested in playing. But I would say that generally speaking, for players that don't want to play Super Break, it is definitely not worth the cost to go into both Dahlia, Fuke, potentially even Lingsha, especially if you're uncomfortable with Gedgar because you have been so used to running highs and sustain. So you're essentially going to be committing like at least 3 costs, if not even more, because you don't even have a Super Break DPS, and that is essentially our Firefly rerun, right? So between our Firefly, Fuke, and Lingsha rerun, this is really just like, okay, you haven't played Super Break last time. I personally don't think there's any value in going on Super Break right now, because at a baseline, you're essentially investing in roughly 3 to 4 cost bare minimum without signature light codes to even get this comp going and get it competing with our current version 4 flagship, which is gonna be namely either Castris previously or the current Finon that's gonna be on Red Up with its E2 upgrade as a potential choice, right? So at the end of the day, because of opportunity cost, for players that do not play Super Break, I don't think they will serve any value. For players that already have played Super Break, so for example, if you already have Fuke, right, you have Lingsha, you have your Super Break DPS, right, whatever is it, Reba, Boothill, or Firefly, this is the banner for all 3 banners where you could consider some of their vertical investments to see if you want to gain even more value, bringing your older Super Break team going into version 4. Out of all of these different upgrades, I would say that E1 into E2 Fuke is probably going to be the highest lifespan. I'm not too sure what Dahlia's Eidolon does as of right now yet, but we know that DPS at the end of the day, they always charm, they always change and go, but supports for that archetype is going to be a little bit hard to replace, especially in this case of Super Break, because I feel that Super Break is a archetype that's very niche, especially to that genre, a little bit similar to DOT. So if they're gonna be getting an upgrade, it is more often than not that the DPS will get replaced first, especially if you have high vertical investments, in this case for Fuke, which just came out back in our version 2.7, right? And on top of that, E1 into E2 Fuke does give you Witness Break efficiency as well as a built-in DDD, which I would say has one of, if not the highest amount of values, even in content such as, for example, Currency Warp, right? Then for Firefly itself, E2 Firefly is honestly, I don't really think we need to take so much about E2 Firefly. I would say that if you are going to be playing Dahlia against toughness lock enemies where you cannot Witness Break the target, E2 Firefly technically would do absolutely nothing because you don't get off a winner's break. So unless you can actually break the target still or kill the mobs that's gonna be tied to the brand new enemy, then E2 Firefly is actually still gonna pop off. Other than that, I would say that having a E0 baseline with strong vertical supports, that is gonna be a little bit more performative compared to an E2 DPS without the supports, right? For Boothill and Reba, unfortunately, they're not gonna be getting re-ran, it ain't what it is. So this is really just for the Firefly mains if you want to consider getting the E2 Firefly, right? If not, that is pretty much it for all of the Super Break rerun. And then for the last two banner, which is gonna be the last 2 weeks, especially just a 2 weeks extension, that is gonna be Aglaea and Sunday, which I honestly think is like it's super random they decided to put this. I'm not too sure if this is actually the case, but this CN content creator also believes the same as me, which is they put this banner just for currency war, so you can build up a Aglaea and Sunday to go into currency war, because I do think that MiHoYo definitely invested quite a lot of budget to make currency war the game mode as it is. It's very well made, a lot of development, a lot of team combinations, and as of right now, the best, if not one of the best teams, is pretty much going to be the Aglaea wheelchair, double boots into the wheel. If you do want to get a better currency war character, I guess Aglaea and Sunday is going to be a little bit more of a value over there. But I would say even for Sunday itself, it's not going to be too crazy because Aglaea doesn't really need Sunday anymore, right? You have Cyrene, so I really don't think there's going to be too much value unless you want to push specifically for the Dance banner, or if you just refuse to use Cyrene, you still want to stick with Sunday plus Aglaea, then I guess you could consider this in that regard, right? Other than that, in terms of endgame performance, I really don't think cost for cost there's going to be any notes of concern there. If you have a Cyrene and you want to try out like other Krauser DPS, in this case it's going to be Aglaea, you can definitely try doing that, but then Sunday is not going to be an addition anymore for the same random regard, because we are at the end of the day going into version 4, and by the time this banner rolls around, which is a 2-week banner for Aglaea and Sunday, it is 2 weeks before Chinese New Year, around Chinese New Year, and version 4 drip marketing would definitely be announced by then. So I think by the time you guys see the new units, right, the FOMO, the fear of missing out, the wow factor for the new era, new role is probably going to set in, and chances are most players are probably not going to be considering this banner at all. So that is pretty much it. With that, we have come to the end of our version 3.8 CM pulling opinions. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I think it's pretty interesting. Please save and plan your resources wisely before we go into version 4. I'm gonna be probably cooking up a couple of more free-to-play account updates leading up to that patch over there. Other than that, I will be seeing you guys for a very long 3.8 by the time MSQ rolls around, right? All the best for our gacha pools. Where over there is gonna be girlfriend is back. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join the use code POKE for 10% off gamer subs. All the best for gacha pools. See you guys next time. Take care.